The Stonehenge is a prehistoric monument in Wiltshire, one of the most recognizable monoliths of the late Neolithic period.
Stonehenge has been a source of mystery for thousands of years. But this week, the prehistoric monument may have given up one of its long-kept secrets.
For centuries, Stonehenge has invited two kinds of awe at the same time: the awe of engineering and the awe of silence. You stand there and the stones look both deliberate and impossible, like someone froze a gesture mid-sentence and walked away. The most enduring questions have always circled the same tight orbit. Who built it? How did they move the stones? Why arrange them with such stubborn precision? And what exactly was the monument for? We have had theories that range from calendar to cemetery, healing shrine to royal power statement, astronomy lab to sacred stage. Each theory explains a slice of the monument and leaves another slice shimmering with doubt. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news.
The mystery of Stonehenge has fascinated the world for centuries.
The imagined modern event begins with something simple and almost boring. An interdisciplinary archaeology team decides to treat Stonehenge like a full data environment rather than a single structure. They feed an AI system an enormous mesh of information: laser scans of every surviving surface, microscopic wear patterns on the bluestones, soil chemistry across the wider landscape, pollen records, known burial placements, ancient climate reconstructions, archaeoastronomical models, and a catalog of other European and Near Eastern megalithic sites that share design motifs. The model is not told to look for a calendar or a temple. It is asked to find the most compressed explanation that accounts for the widest set of details at once. This is where the old approach and the new approach diverge. Humans are excellent at proposing meaning. We are not always excellent at weighing 10,000 faint signals that are individually ambiguous but collectively decisive. The AI does what a person cannot do in a lifetime. It runs millions of pattern tests across space, time, material, and ritual context. It compares alignment hypotheses against acoustic mapping. It checks whether specific stone placements correlate with geochemical signatures of fires or feasts. It looks at the monument not just as architecture but as behavior fossilized into geometry. The first chilling result is not astronomical, it is probabilistic. The AI identifies that the sequence of construction phases, when mapped against regional climate stress markers and population movement estimates, matches the rhythm of crisis rather than the rhythm of celebration. In this scenario, Stonehenge is not primarily a monument of stable prosperity. It is a monument of emergency governance. A place built, expanded, and reconfigured at moments when the social fabric was under pressure. The stones are not a static symbol, but a technology of coordination, a way of forcing agreement when tribes or communities might otherwise splinter. That interpretation alone would not be terrifying. It would be grimly practical. The terror arrives when the AI links the architectural changes to a recurring, high-stakes ritual pattern visible in scattered archaeological sites across the region. The model suggests that Stonehenge operated as a central node within a broader network of seasonal assemblies that culminated in a single socially binding act. The act, according to the inferred pattern, was not merely feasting or exchange. It appears to have involved sacrificial selection, but in a way that is more politically sophisticated than the word sacrifice usually implies. The AI's proposed mechanism is brutal and coldly rational. During periods of famine risk, disease flare-ups, or violent competition over land, the monument functioned as a legitimacy machine. Leaders needed a way to prove that decisions were not arbitrary. The arrangement of stones, the path people walked, the timing of celestial events, and the acoustics of chants created a theatrical system that externalized judgment. The people did not have to trust a chief's private motives. They could trust a ritual that felt bigger than any individual. The AI models how sound would carry within the ring, how shadows would fall at specific times, how the movement of light across the lintels could appear to mark chosen individuals or groups. In this telling, Stonehenge is a courtroom built out of superstition and mathematics. It is a place where you could turn a devastating political choice into an apparently cosmic one. When hunger loomed, you did not say we must reduce mouths to feed. You said the stones and the sky have spoken. The monument allowed early societies to enact the harshest possible form of cohesion, survival enforced by sacred spectacle. Part of what makes this vision so unsettling is that it doesn't rely on cartoonish evil. It relies on the logic of survival. The AI's pattern suggests that the early builders were not bloodthirsty mystics looking for excuses to kill. They were engineers of belief trying to prevent total collapse. The terrify factor is the possibility that Stonehenge represents a moment when human communities discovered that ritualized cruelty could be stabilized, standardized, and made emotionally tolerable through architecture. The model goes further into the design as a kind of predictive instrument. Instead of treating the solar and lunar alignments as an abstract calendar, the AI proposes that these alignments were used to anchor collective memory of rare disaster cycles. It identifies a subtle geometry that appears to encode intervals related to multi-year climate oscillations. The stones might have helped track when a region was due for harsher winters, poorer harvests, or higher disease risk. Not because prehistoric people had modern climate science, but because they had long memories and an urgent need to turn memory into action. This is not far-fetched within the internal logic of the scenario. Humans have always embedded survival knowledge into myth. The terrifying twist is that the AI suggests the myth and the monument were entangled with a specific policy, the ritual of reduction. Stonehenge becomes, in effect, a social algorithm, a place where data from the sky meets data from the land and produces a decision that everyone agrees to obey. The event of the AI reveal, therefore, is less about uncovering a single secret and more about collapsing multiple mysteries into one coherent, unsettling purpose. It explains why the monument is both astronomically aligned and acoustically potent. It explains why its construction spanned generations. It explains why the site sits within a landscape dense with processional routes and burials. In this interpretation, burial is not an incidental feature around a sacred place. It is part of the operational footprint of an institution that manage life and death at scale. The implications are enormous because they puncture a comforting modern narrative. We like to imagine our ancestors as either gentle stargazers or naive spiritualists. This AI-driven story implies they were neither. They were capable of designing a civilization-scale tool for enforcing consensus under extreme scarcity. The intelligence of the design becomes inseparable from the darkness of its possible use. It also reframes our relationship with technology in the present. If an ancient society could build a stone-based system to legitimize harsh collective decisions, what does that say about our own tools that claim neutrality? The AI that interprets Stonehenge in this way becomes a mirror that reflects the uncomfortable truth that the line between sacred order and institutional violence is thin. We might recognize the shape of that line in modern bureaucracies, data-driven public policy, and automated decision systems that claim to be objective while shaping human outcomes. Another implication is epistemic humility. Even if this AI interpretation is only partly right, it demonstrates how easily humans can miss the unifying function of complex sites. We tend to classify monuments into tidy boxes: religious, scientific, funerary, political. The most plausible prehistoric realities may have been hybrid, where science served religion, religion served politics, and politics served survival. The AI approach in this fictional setup doesn't necessarily prove a single truth. It exposes how our categories can be too polite to describe ancient life. There is also a cautionary implication about seduction by coherence. An AI can produce an explanation that is elegant, chilling, and deeply satisfying. The danger is that elegance is not automatically truth. Archaeology is built on fragments and probabilities. A model that connects climate stress, spatial design, and ritual behavior might be reading a real signal or might be overfitting a beautiful story onto incomplete evidence. The terrifying part is not only the possibility that Stonehenge was an institution of ritualized culling. The terrifying part is that we might yearn for this narrative because it feels like closure. But the scenario's AI does not stop at Stonehenge itself. It compares the monument's inferred ritual logic to other sites and finds parallels. Not identical structures, but similar patterns of centralized assembly spaces positioned within travel corridors and resource boundaries. The implication is that Stonehenge was not a solitary oddity. It may have been the most refined example of a broader cultural solution to a recurring problem. When conditions became unbearable, societies centralized power not through castles or written law, but through sacred architecture that made the hardest decisions feel inevitable. That possibility changes how we interpret the rise of complex human organization. We often credit agriculture, trade, and technological innovation as the engines of social complexity. The AI-implied story suggests another engine: coordinated fear, a shared willingness to submit to a cruel decision-making system because the alternative was chaotic death. Civilization, in that light, is not only a triumph of cooperation, it is also a triumph of carefully managed dread. The emotional weight of this interpretation also touches the stones themselves. The blue stones hauled from far away cease to be romantic tokens of unity. They become costly investments in an institution powerful enough to demand enormous labor across distance and time. The Sarsens are no longer just feats of engineering. They are the fixed pillars of authority, the physical proof that the system is bigger than any single generation. A society does not undertake that level of coordination unless the structure answers a profound existential need. Even the widely discussed healing aspect of Stonehenge could be reinterpreted instead of discarded. In this scenario, healing rituals may have been part of the legitimacy economy. A place that can restore the sick also earns the moral right to impose painful collective sacrifices. The monument becomes a paradoxical machine that offers hope and demands obedience. The deeper terror lies in the psychological sophistication this implies. The builders may have understood that power could not survive on fear alone. It needed compassion as a counterpart, delivered in public and encoded into the same sacred space. On a broader cultural level, this AI-driven narrative suggests that the origins of moral frameworks may be more entangled with ecological pressure than we like to admit. If the stones were linked to crisis governance, then early ethical systems might have been forged in the furnace of scarcity. The sacred was not only a way of making sense of the cosmos, it was a way of stabilizing communities when resources threatened to run out. The monument becomes a reminder that what we call faith may have been, in part, a social technology for distributing pain. The implications for modern identity are sharp. Many people seek comfort in ancient monuments as evidence of timeless wisdom and gentle spiritual continuity. A reading that highlights ritualized coercion is a point-blank challenge to that comfort. It does not diminish the brilliance of the builders. It reassigns the purpose of that brilliance to something morally ambiguous. The past becomes less like a peaceful prologue to modern life and more like an earlier version of the same harsh trade-offs we still grapple with. This also amplifies a new kind of fear about AI itself. When a machine can spin separate threads of evidence into a single narrative that feels emotionally inevitable, it changes how authority is experienced. The public might be tempted to treat the AI interpretation as a final verdict rather than one hypothesis among many. The terrifying parallel is that the future of our own decision-making could drift toward the exact dynamic the AI claims to have found in Stonehenge, an external system that legitimizes choices too painful for humans to own. So the event is not just about a prehistoric ring of stones and an algorithmic breakthrough. It is about a collision between ancient and modern ways of delegating responsibility. Stonehenge, in this imagined revelation, becomes a warning encoded in rock, a reminder that civilizations sometimes build sacred machines to make cruelty feel like destiny. If you sit with that idea, the monument becomes stranger and heavier. The open air around it feels less like empty space and more like a stage where the oldest human drama played out. The attempt to keep a group alive by transforming fear into ritual and ritual into law. The stones endure because the need they represent never completely disappeared. We still search for systems that can turn unbearable choices into something we can collectively bear. That is why this AI solution in this version of the story lands with such force. It does not offer a comforting secret. It offers a plausible anatomy of how humans have always used symbols, data, and shared narratives to survive. It suggests that the brilliance of our ancestors may be inseparable from the darkest tools they invented for unity. And it hints that the greatest monuments are not always celebrations of what we love about humanity, but records of what we were willing to do when the world narrowed and the future demanded a price. And once that possibility is allowed to exist, the stones stop being a puzzle you solve and start being a device you have to interpret with caution, because the meaning you assign to them says as much about your own era as it does about theirs. The most unnerving implication of this AI breakthrough is that it reframes Stonehenge as an intentional system of social calibration, not simply a place people gathered, but a place engineered to change what people were willing to accept. Architecture as persuasion, geometry as governance, ritual as a lever that could move a population's emotions in a predictable direction. That interpretation forces a new look at the details that used to seem decorative or incidental. The widths of passageways, the pacing of approach routes, the placement of stones relative to natural sightlines, even small asymmetries that older theories might have dismissed as imprecision. If the AI is right in spirit, those features were part of a psychological choreography. The monument would not need writing to instruct participants. It would use movement and sensation. You walk, you wait, you hear the sound change around you, you see light behave the way the elders told you it would, and your nervous system does the rest. The monumental scale compresses doubt. In that light, the real mystery is not how ancient people thought about the universe, but how they thought about each other. The AI's interpretation implies that they understood something modern societies still struggle to admit. Collective reality is not only discovered, it is engineered. A community can be shaped by stories, yes, but it can also be shaped by the physical environment that hosts those stories. Stonehenge becomes a reminder that the most powerful narratives are often embedded in place, because place is harder to argue with than a person is. Another implication emerges from the monument's long, multi-phase development. If the AI has mapped a consistent underlying function across design changes, that suggests institutional continuity beyond individual leaders. In other words, it implies that this was not a single charismatic vision, but a durable social role that outlived its founders. The institution, whatever we call it, was stable enough to justify repeated investment even when generations changed. That is startling for a society without formal chronicles. The stones might be read as an administrative memory, a built archive of obligation. This pushes the conversation into the uncomfortable territory of early state formation. We often imagine complex governance emerging hand in hand with writing and bureaucracy. But Stonehenge, under this lens, would represent a parallel route: governance through ritual infrastructure, a kind of pre-literate constitution. The monument is not a symbol of authority. It is the mechanism by which authority is manufactured and renewed. Each gathering would function like a reset of the social contract, with the stones acting as the silent witness that makes promises feel binding. Once you see Stonehenge that way, the site's relationship to identity becomes darker and more complex. It might have been a place where belonging was adjudicated, where groups affirmed who counted as part of the communal body and who stood at the margins. The terrifying part is not only the possibility of harsh decisions, but the possibility that the monument standardized the criteria of worth. Ritual can be a shelter for meaning, but it can also be a machine for sorting humanity into categories that feel sacred and therefore unquestionable. The AI's approach also suggests something eerie about the role of uncertainty. The builders may have leveraged ambiguity as a feature, not a flaw. A system that promises divine or cosmic judgment does not need to be perfectly transparent. In fact, partial opacity can be essential. If the ritual outcome is fully predictable to every participant, the spell breaks. But if the logic is just clear enough to feel lawful and just mysterious enough to feel transcendent, it becomes extremely persuasive. The stones could have been designed to live right on that knife edge. This yields a chilling parallel with modern algorithmic systems. Today, many people accept major life outcomes, shaped by complex models they cannot personally audit. The emotional pathway is similar. The system feels too large to be biased in a human way, too technical to be argued with on equal footing. If Stonehenge was a prehistoric structure that created a similar emotional stance, then the AI solution becomes a warning about how easily humans can outsource moral weight to external frameworks, whether those frameworks are celestial, architectural, or computational. The implication for archaeology itself is dramatic. The field could be nudged toward a new category of interpretation in which monuments are analyzed as behavioral technologies. This doesn't reduce spirituality or cosmology. It reframes them as functional components inside a broader system of survival and cohesion. The terrifying elegance of the AI story is its insistence that meaning and mechanism are intertwined. A ritual can be sincerely believed and strategically useful at the same time. The two are not mutually exclusive. That duality is hard for modern sensibilities, which often want ancient peoples to be either devout innocents or cynical manipulators. There is also a methodological implication about how we treat soft variables like fear, hope, shame, and trust. Archaeology has often struggled to talk about emotions without slipping into speculative drama. An AI that can infer likely emotional engineering from spatial design, comparative ritual data, and environmental stress markers gives scholars a new rhetorical and analytical toolkit. But it also brings a risk. The more convincing the model's outputs look, the easier it becomes to confuse narrative plausibility with empirical certainty. The terror here is epistemological. A machine might make our best guesses feel like verified history. The monument's materiality also takes on a new resonant dread. Stone is slow, stone is stubborn, stone is a choice to make an institution feel inevitable. If the AI reading is even close, the builders deliberately chose the most durable medium available to lock a social rule into the landscape. That means the real subject of Stonehenge might not be the sky, but time. A society planning to endure repeated crises could need a repeated ritual solution. The stones are the promise that the solution will still be there when the next hardship arrives. This also complicates our assumptions about consent. Participating in a ritual that carries immense social weight does not necessarily mean individuals agreed with every outcome. It may mean they agreed that the alternative was worse. The AI's interpretation implies an ancient moral calculus that is painfully familiar in modern disaster ethics. The choice between coordinated harm and chaotic harm. The terrifying part is that this logic can feel persuasive even today, which suggests how deeply rooted such trade-offs are in human group psychology. If Stonehenge served as a center where that calculus was enacted, its builders were not merely priests or engineers. They were designers of collective thresholds. They built the place where a community decided how far it was willing to go to survive. That is a profoundly unsettling vision of ancient sophistication, because it suggests that the human capacity for ethical compromise is not a modern corruption, but an ancient adaptation. The stones, then, would be less about enlightenment and more about containment. The AI-driven framing also invites reconsideration of why the site maintained a pull across territories. A monument that could transform conflict-prone groups into a temporary, rule-following body would be invaluable in a world where resources and alliances shifted unpredictably. The act of traveling to the site could itself be part of the solution. The journey turns participation into investment. The more effort you spend to arrive, the harder it becomes to reject the institutional outcome. The stones do not simply host power, they harvest it from the labor and emotion of everyone who approaches them. This makes the landscape around Stonehenge feel like part of a single integrated system rather than a backdrop. The pathways, the clearings, the broader ceremonial geometry implied by the surrounding features would become the long inhale before the ritual's exhale. If the AI has identified that wider pattern, it suggests that the monument's terror is not localized. It radiates outward into a network of places that collectively shaped the experience of inevitability. The central ring might be only the final chamber of a much larger social engine. From here, the implications touch how we think about the origins of large-scale peace. Peace is often imagined as a gentle progress toward cooperation. But an institution like this, if it existed as the AI implies, suggests peace might sometimes be the product of controlled coercion. A society can reduce internal violence by centralizing an authority that everyone fears and reveres. The terrifying twist is that a sacred peace can be bought at a price that would be hard to morally defend in calm times. This would also complicate modern heritage storytelling. We visit ancient monuments to feel connected to human creativity, to take comfort in continuity. A narrative that emphasizes the monument as a mechanism for difficult, possibly cruel social stabilization challenges the idea of heritage as purely uplifting. It asks whether we can admire ancestral intelligence while staying morally honest about its potential applications. It forces the uncomfortable realization that human ingenuity has always had two faces, one that builds beauty and one that makes harshness sustainable. The AI interpretation also carries implications for how we imagine knowledge in prehistoric societies. The builders may have used meticulous observation of natural cycles not merely to satisfy curiosity, but to grant authority to social rules. That is a sharper and more unsettling view of early science. The more accurate your predictions of the natural world, the more you can anchor political decisions in apparent cosmic order. The terrifying implication for modern times is obvious. Predictive power can be converted into legitimacy, and legitimacy can be used to make extreme policies feel unavoidable. What's most haunting is how this story redefines the idea of mystery itself. The AI does not remove the mystery by giving a tidy, functional label. It deepens it by revealing a possible motive that is psychologically and ethically complex. The question transforms from what was Stonehenge for to what kind of people needed Stonehenge to be that way. That shift is heavier than any single archaeological answer. It pulls the monument out of the realm of quaint enigma and into the realm of human pattern, where the past stops being safely distant. It also suggests that Stonehenge might have operated as a rehearsal space for collective obedience. Even if the darkest inferred functions were rare or symbolic, the repeated act of assembling, following processions, accepting ritual outcomes, and reinforcing shared narratives would train a society in coordinated response. The stones could have been part of a cultural immune system. The terrifying part is that a cultural immune system can attack its own body under stress. The same mechanism that protects cohesion can become the mechanism that justifies exclusion or severity. This is where the AI story becomes most unsettlingly relevant. A monument that teaches a population to accept hard decisions because they feel sanctioned by an external order is not a relic of a vanished mindset. It is a pattern that can reappear whenever uncertainty spikes and the appetite for simple legitimacy rises. The stones are ancient, but the psychological architecture is evergreen. If a prehistoric landscape could be used to stabilize fear, then modern digital landscapes can do the same at unprecedented speed. So even without describing any later ripple effects or public reactions, the implications of the event are already enormous. The AI solution implies that the boundary between sacred awe and political functionality was never clean. It implies that the oldest monumental achievements may have been built not to celebrate a golden age, but to survive a precarious one. It implies that our yearning for simple, noble origins may be a romance we impose on evidence that is messier and darker. And perhaps the most terrifying implication is the quietest one. If the AI can plausibly connect architecture, environment, and ritual into a single explanatory engine for Stonehenge, then the real revolution is not just about this site. It is about the possibility that many of the world's ancient wonders were not merely expressions of belief, but instruments that helped a society absorb pain without breaking. That would mean the human story carved into stone is not always a story of triumph. Sometimes it is a story of survival strategies so effective that they became sacred. Sometimes the miracle is not that people built monuments at all, but that they built them to live with the hardest truths of their world. That possibility also changes how we think about the monument's silence. If the stones functioned as a kind of institutional interface, then the quiet was part of the design. A system meant to steady a community doesn't need constant explanation. It needs an atmosphere that makes questions feel smaller than the place itself. The openness of the plain, the long line of sight, and the blunt permanence of rock could produce a mood where hesitation feels like a private weakness rather than a legitimate public stance. In that sense, the monument's power would not only be in what people believed, but in what they felt unable to contest once they stepped inside its emotional gravity. It also hints that the site may have been an experiment in turning many local identities into a single temporary people. To draw distant groups into one frame, you would want symbols spacious enough to hold contradictions. A circle of massive stones is strikingly nonspecific compared with carved gods or dynastic emblems, and that abstraction can be politically useful. Different communities could arrive believing the space accommodated their traditions, while the shared procedures of arrival, waiting, and coordinated attention align their behavior without requiring perfect ideological agreement. The frightening insight is that unity can be manufactured through shared choreography, even when beliefs remain fragmented. Seen this way, Stonehenge becomes an early form of infrastructural belief, where the structure is a civic tool you can physically enter. The AI reading implies that the monument's most enduring power may have been procedural rather than doctrinal. You do not need everyone to carry the same story if you can guide them through the same sequence of actions, pauses, and thresholds. The stones would mark the moment where private interpretation gives way to public obligation, and where personal anxiety is absorbed into a collective rhythm. That idea lingers because it suggests a timeless human vulnerability. We often accept what feels orderly and ancient, even when we can't fully articulate why. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on AI solving Stonehenge's mystery in terrifying ways? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.